If you want to go fast, you've got to have some good suspension to put some power down to the ground. And suspension is the very last thing that we need to finish up on our extended cab four-wheel drive drag truck before the rolling chassis is officially complete. Now, last time you guys saw this truck, which was just a week ago, we had finished up the front suspension. So we've got some Viking Crusader coilovers, we got some aftermarket lower control arms, we've got some upper arms, the brakes are on, the CV axles are in. Basically, the front suspension is done. And since you guys saw it last time, I threw the wheels on it, put it on the ground, and realized there's one adjustment or part swap that we're gonna have to make. Not a big deal, we'll take care of that later on in this episode. But the main thing that I want to get done is the rear suspension. What do we have left to do? A couple things. One, we have to get the spring perches welded to the axle tube. Two, we have to get some brakes on this axle, plumb some brake lines on it, and then finally we have to get probably the most important part, arguably, of a drag leaf spring suspension. We have to get the Caltracs installed so this can transfer the power into the pavement and make the tire stick to the ground. So let's jump right in. So we've got to get the spring perches welded to the axle. This is not the final contraption that's going to hold the axle to the springs. This is just something I rigged together way back so we could make the move when we were coming from Utah to Colorado. So I have some round U-bolts and I have a Funkhouser lower traction bar mount. That's pretty trick. I'll show you that in a second. But first things first, we'll strip this apart. We'll sand the paint off the axle tube. We'll get the little bit of rust left on here cleaned up. And then we'll get it mocked up so we can set the pinion angle. So these are just a generic like off-road style 1/4 inch spring perch, and I added a second hole just to shift the axle back 1 inch, and then because they're folded together I'm just going to weld the ends right now, and then when we weld it to the axle all I'll have to do is those two moon-shaped welds to get it to stick to the axle. So let's do it. A little while later, this is what we got. I went ahead and prettied these up a little bit, got them fully welded in the hole that we no longer needed, and that is ready to weld to the axle. It is going to be held to the axle with U-bolts like this. These are from Funkhouser race cars, same company that makes the anti-roll bar and the sliders that I have. This is their adjustable Caltrac mount, which is pretty neat. And this is actually the reason why I bought them, because it has this tow hook or a tie-down hook right on the back there, so you don't have to put an axle strap around the axle. I thought that was really, really cool. And of course, the adjustment is awesome. Normally, these only are supposed to work with a 1/2 inch U-bolt, but the holes were pretty close, so I just massaged them to run the 9/16 U-bolt because I figured, what the heck, bigger is better, right? So let's get the axle mocked up. We will adjust the pinion angle, and then we will tack weld it in place, take it apart, fully weld it, paint it, probably put some brake line tabs on the axle, and a whole bunch more. So let us continue on. Now, the reason why I moved the axle back 1 inch by repositioning the hole is just basically it centers the axle in the wheel well opening. Seems to me whenever you do a flip kit on these trucks and the axle's above the spring, it looks better pushed back 1 inch. So that's the story there. And the cool thing is, that's kind of common. So a lot of parts like this already have the second hole drilled in the 1 inch back position. So that will line up perfectly. Just needs a quick massage. Basically take the thickness of the powder coat off to go around the nut. Okay, gotta set the pinion angle, which means we need the weight of the truck on the suspension, so that's what the jack stand is for. I'm gonna measure the angle of the drivetrain, engine transmission transfer case. It's gonna be pointed kind of downhill. I'm gonna measure or set the angle of the differential to sort of match that angle, but going up, but then take away like 1.5 degrees, because under acceleration, the pinion kind of wants to go up. And what you want is those angles to be parallel, no more at full throttle. When you're just cruising, it'll be relaxed just a little bit. So that is in a nutshell what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna see if we can let the suspension down on this. Might be a little sketchy, but we got it. So the absolute number doesn't really matter. I mean, you could set pinion angle of a vertical shaft, but what really matters is the relative difference between the two. So right now, this one is going down at 3.6 degrees. So we want to get close to that, just a little bit less. Just double checked, and they actually recommend a 2 to 4 degree difference in height. So I'm going to bring that down to like 1.6. Well, I made a bit of a mistake, or a miscalculation, whatever we want to call it. I got to do this again. I'm just going to cut the 2 tack welds. Luckily, it's not that big of a deal. But when I supported the weight of the truck, I had the jack stand right here on the front of the spring. That caused a little bit of a twisting motion, so the pinion was actually a little bit lower when everything settled than it was supposed to be. I kind of figured that would happen, but I just miscalculated how much like spring back it was going to do. So I am going to cut the tack welds, put everything back in place, and this time I'll just put the weight of the truck on the tires so it's sitting exactly how it's supposed to. Then I'll re-tack weld it, and then I'll pick things right back up with you guys as soon as we have everything re-tacked, and then we'll start the finish welding process. So perches are tack welded on. I triple checked everything, both in terms of how the axle is centered underneath the truck and the pinion angle. I checked it at ride height. I even jacked it up at full extension and checked it there just to see how the truck's going to react as the suspension separates under power. All the angles look great. The only other thing I'm going to do is add a little stud here for the brake flex hose, and then I'll probably get a few little tabs tack welded on for the steel hardline on the axle. But a little bit of welding and painting, this will be ready to go back under the truck. So for brakes on the back of this truck, we're matching the set that we have on the front. This is a power stop kit. This is from a little bit later model SUV. I think it's a 12-inch rotor, not positive. But we can run a 17-inch wheel on the back of this. I'm not going to run 15s. I want to run either 17s or 18s for our drag race setup. So basically stock stuff that's powder coated with a really good pad. That's what we have here. And just like the front brakes, these were on the ugly truck for a little while before I converted that one to run a 15-inch wheel out back, which that obviously required a much smaller brake. So again, no reason not to reuse this stuff because it is perfect. And it just justifies, you know, hoarding parts forever. This is something I don't quite understand. On these flex hoses, for some reason the right-hand side comes with a bracket, but the left-hand side did not. So we had to make a special trip to the junkyard for a little bracket. So I have to start keeping track of how many different trucks this actually has parts from. But it's like, if you include the little stuff like that, it's gotta be a dozen or two. So there we go, one bomb-proof axle ready to go under the truck. It's funny because when you sit this side by side with an 8.5 10 bolt, you really realize how much bigger these 14 bolts are. Technically, there's only about an inch difference in the ring gear. So the 10 bolt's an 8.5, this is a 9.5 14 bolt, but just like everything is scaled up. The center section is huge. The brakes and stuff are still the same, but just pure strength. And of course, now we have all of the upgrades needed to be not only legal, but safe for NHRA stuff like the screw and wheel studs, C-clip eliminators. Of course, we've got a TrueTrack differential. I think covered all that before. We also have the anti-roll bar mounts. We have the shock mounts. I welded these little tabs on for the brake hardline that we're gonna build later on. And once we get it in the truck, I'll just do the last little bit of painting that I couldn't really do here with it sitting on the jack stand. So we'll get it in the truck. This is the rest of the parts needed for the rear suspension. You've seen these U-bolts, that's pretty basic. The rest of the stuff I pieced together from Calvert, which is their Caltrac traction bar setup. Run these on any sort of a leaf spring setup that I do. They work. They're simple and they work. And they're same company that makes the split monoleaf spring. So those already have the pivots pressed in instead of a bushing. So the only unknown I have right now is if I asked for the wrong length of bar here. I asked for a 30.5. Typically these trucks come with a 29.5. Normally I'll shift the axle back that inch like we talked about earlier, but when I had it mocked up, it was like too far back in the C-notch. So that might not be the right length, or the pin on the split monoleafs might be a little further back than I guessed compared to a stock setup. So anyway, let's get the axle back in the truck. I don't think I showed you guys yet, but I did mock up a transfer case. That's an NP263, but that one is no good. So it's literally just for mock-up. Always have to check if the camera's rolling because I forget to press the button all the time. All right, quick detour because I'm an idiot. I forgot something very important 3 years ago. When you install the Caltrac, you have this aluminum bushing pressed in. That was already here. You slide the pivot over the front of the leaf spring and you take the steel bushing and theoretically it's going to slide nice and easy once it's lined up through the center of the whole thing. And the way that these work is this force transfer link on the bottom that gets pushed ahead under acceleration. This little roller presses down on the leaf spring. Now for this to work, this has to pivot nice and free. But 3 years ago, when I mocked this up, I didn't think it was going to be mocked up for 3 years and then trailered 600 miles from one state to another through a snowstorm. So we have an issue. Yep. Now, if I paid attention in school, which I didn't do a whole lot, the process responsible for this, I think, is galvanic corrosion. That's when you have two dissimilar metals, steel and aluminum, and they react and they form this oxide layer, which expands and tightens up and freezes the sleeve inside the bushing. Either way, the fix is the same. A little bit of time with a wire brush. And that issue could have been prevented by doing this step right here. Applying grease. So these spring sliders are pretty cool because instead of a bushing, they use two bearings to let the rear of the leaf spring move as the suspension cycles. So it just reduces friction and kind of lets the suspension do the work that it's supposed to do. So our shop has this really cool feature. So whenever you're like working on a truck and you drop a bolt, it doesn't matter where you are in the building, it always ends up in the same place. I call this the Bolt Catcher 7200 by Binford Tools. From Summit, yeah.
Well, you got one.
Excellent. We love when Summit delivers us goodies. And finally, we'll get these transfer links installed and cross our fingers that they're the right length. Yeah, typically at full droop like this, the little roller, I don't know if you can see it, the little roller typically is way up here, so I think these are way off. Hey, do you guys have a trade-in program for people who are dumb and don't properly measure their force transfer lengths before they place an order?
No, we just changed them. I mean, did you order a custom kit recently or something? Or?
Yeah, I ordered them and I was 2 inches too long, so.
Oh. Ordered a set of 30 and a half, shows?
Yes, and I need 28 and a half.
Oh, that's the other way. Normally, that car normally has a 29 and a half inch bar. So I'll send these out today, and then when you send the other ones back in, if you could write this number on the outside of the box today.
Okay, just to the return address that's on the ones coming to me?
Exactly.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Bye. So, huge shout out to Calvert Racing. Number one, they make an awesome product. I don't care what you have. If it has leaf springs, you probably ought to have some Caltracs on it. But most importantly, their customer service, as you just saw, is awesome. They're going to swap me out the links. Totally my mistake for ordering the incorrect one. So, those guys are awesome. Check them out. Not sponsored by any means, but they just have an awesome product. So, next thing that we need to fix has to do with the ride height of the truck. As you can see right now, the front is 2 inches lower than the back. I don't like that, but it's also outside of the design parameters that we need for the front shocks. When I designed the front suspension a couple of years ago, I had to make some assumptions on the spring rate based on the estimated weight of the truck and some measurements like where the lower mount goes on the control arm, for example. And I can't remember exactly what I did, but the number I came up with gave me a 600 pound per inch coil spring. So some of the assumptions must have been incorrect, so we need to change the coil spring. That's the short version of it. I don't know if I'll be able to do it. I think so, but I'm going to try to swap this out just by undoing the upper. Not that it's difficult to undo the lower also, but I think if I just pop this bolt out, I can lean it back off the preload, swap the coils, and right back together. So this will be easier to demonstrate with no spring. Basically, we want this shock here to be about there, approximately halfway in its travel with the truck at ride height with the full weight on it. We could have accomplished that by raising or increasing the preload. That would have done it, but I still think the spring rate is just a little bit too soft. So we want the right rate to hold up the weight of the truck We want the shock to be in its correct position, and then once we need to fine tune the ride height with those correct, then we can just use the different holes. But I think if we have the same hole with our stiffer spring, we can get this truck exactly where we want it. I picked these up from Summit Racing, excuse me. Summit has all kinds of coil springs, and I think these were like 68 bucks. So definitely not a big deal at all to get some different coil springs. Just go to Summit, you know, type in, say this for example is a 2.5-inch ID, 12-inch uncompressed length, and they'll give you every spring rate known to man. And the blue coils match the truck so much better. So that actually worked out pretty good. We now have just 1/2 of an inch of rake. So the front from the ground to the fender height is only 1/2 an inch lower than the back. And that's pretty much what I was going for. This truck isn't going to be like the lowest thing in the world. A 2-wheel drive, you get down on the ground and they can look really, really good. But a 4-wheel drive, we have front CV angles to contend with, and we want those to be at ride height. They're gonna go uphill a little bit. And then ideally when you launch and you're under power, the front will rise and the CV angles will be approximately flat. So that's kind of where we're at. I started out, I swapped the springs with 0 preload, so just raised the adjuster until they barely touched, and then put the tires on, put it on the ground, took some measurements, and it still wasn't quite high enough, so I added about 1/4 inch of preload to the bottom adjuster nut, and that got everything perfect. So the shock's basically half travel right now, and the ride height is right where I want it. Never tightened up the tire rods because I knew I would be doing this before too long. I don't know if you guys can see the center link from there, but that's how loose it is. That's really bad. Here's the last little bit of steering upgrade that we're going to be doing for now. We might upgrade this even more later on, but for now, the parts that are in here, the pitman, the idler, and the idler pivot, they're just old worn out stock stuff that I threw in there. So we're gonna put these TTX parts on there. This is supposed to be super strong and durable. I did have these little reinforcements left over from a Duramax project, and I was hoping they would fit. The pitman arm one looks like it just might. Basically, they're supposed to stop a rocking motion on here, but the idler arm one, the shape is totally, completely wrong. So that isn't gonna work. This one, they're actually kind of bent from some 4-wheel drive launches and stuff. So we're gonna forget that part for now, and we'll just upgrade the center bits, and then our rolling chassis will be done for now. Maybe upgrade it more later on down the road. Now, I don't know if it's irony, paradox, or contradiction, but I cannot stand greasy parts. But rusty parts don't bother me, unless they're rusty because I ground off paint to do some welding. In that case, rust does bother me. Make sense? Now, if you're wondering why I am cleaning up this old steering box, that's a great question. I think it's a reman one, just based on like the green paint and stuff like that, but I should probably replace it. But this stuff gets expensive. The dollars add up for all these parts that we're swapping out. How tight are these supposed to be?
I think it's like 180 foot-pounds, something like that. 200 something.
Ugh, well, if it's moving the table, that's probably it. Probably should clean the frame and paint that too at some point. Well, the checklist is still a mile long, but we're crossing things off every single day. And this time, for real, the rolling chassis is pretty much complete, aside from the lower Caltrac links, which I believe will be here tomorrow. Now, everything that we put on here is designed for drag racing. And I have what I'm going to call the ultimate drag truck setup here on the chassis. We've got the Calvert split monoleaf springs. We have the Calvert traction bars. We have from Funkhouser the lower traction bar mounts with adjustment holes and the handy dandy tow hook point. We have their anti-roll bar kit, and way back there we have their spring sliders. From Got Torque Differential, we have the 14-bolt semi-floater, the DB Rods fuel cell. I just love that. That's like beautiful welds. We got the Viking Crusader shocks out back. In the middle, we now have a drive shaft. We have more Viking Crusaders, custom tubular lower control arms, and a bunch of other refreshed goodies, which means as far as the rolling chassis goes, it's pretty much ready to go. And up top, we have the correct spring rate, so we adjusted the ride height. We still do have to do an alignment, which we'll take care of later on. And I've been picking away at a few other odds and ends, like I finally got my power steering pump in, threw a belt on. The engine's pretty much ready to go. We just need now to finish up most of the plumbing. And that's going to be the biggest last hurdle, plumbing and I guess electrical. I do have to get some fuel lines built. I do have to run the brake lines. I think I mentioned before I'm going to pull the cab off. That seems drastic, but right now it's literally just the bolts and a steering shaft. Nothing, and I made sure to do this on purpose, but nothing is connected between the engine and the chassis or the body. Like there's no wiring, there's no plumbing, so we're pretty much ready to go. So we'll take care of that at a later date, and that'll just, by removing the cab from the frame, it'll give me a lot more room to run the fuel lines where I want them, kind of on top of the frame rail, out of the way of anything that's hot or moving. So we'll take care of that later on, but we have made good progress. Like I said, wiring, that's going to be one of the other big things. So we've got our work cut out for us, but progress is progress. So thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate it. More fun stuff coming up next time, including a new giveaway. So stay tuned. Thank you, guys.